In this video, we're going to learn about panel design. Panels are a fundamental part of comic book art. Here you have the Family Circus. This is a single panel comic strip. We've got one image and then a caption below it. Things get a little bit more complicated. Here we have Peanuts. Here we have Lucy and Charlie Brown. And this is a 4-panel comic strip. In this comic strip, Lucy and Charlie Brown are having a walk, and then they stop, they look at each other. Lucy throws her arm in the air, and then they face in different directions. Lucy puts her hands up. But what do we see? We see 4 different images. In this image, they are not even walking, they're just facing in the same direction, then they're facing each other, then pretty much in the same place, but now they're facing forward. So how do we know that they're walking and then they stop? Well, that's because of the panels. Walking and then stopping occurs in between the panels. This space here is called the gutter. And since in English we read from the left to the right, we know what direction to go in to put these panels together to make sense of what is happening. Here's an example of a very traditional, conventional panel design. This is a Marvel comic book from the 1980s called Secret Wars 2. As we open it, we start out with what's called a splash panel. This is one big image. Then we move into a traditional 9-panel page. Each panel is the same size and shape, very easy to read, very easy to follow. We just move from one panel to the next, and then down, from the left to the right, and then down, just as you would when you were reading text. Here's another pretty traditional example. This is from The Amazing Spider-Man, also about mid-1980s. Here we start out very traditional. The next page, we've got our splash panel. That's a full-page illustration. And then we move into a somewhat traditional panel by panel. But now this is what I want to have a closer look at. This part right down here. So the situation in this story is that these 2 characters are having a conversation, Mephisto and whatever this guy's name is. Now you'll notice that there's a big shift from this part here to these panels down here. Now this is indicated by the absence of color. These are only 2 colors. But for us, when we're looking at panels, take a look at the design of the borders. Now, what we have here is a flashback narrated by Mephisto. And the flashback is indicated by these shaky borders on these panels. Here we have a graphic novel from the early 2000s. For the most part, this has a pretty traditional design to its panels. But there's a couple of little variations that are interesting that I want to have a look at. This one, for example. So what do you notice about this illustration up here on the left? That illustration has no border. This one does. This one doesn't. Now, why is that? As you can see, he is alone. So the artist is emphasizing this character's loneliness by removing the border. So far, our examples have come from American and European graphic novels and comic books. But here's something a little bit different. This is a Japanese comic book. This is a manga. And unlike American or European comics written that are in English, this one is going to be read from right to left rather than left to right. So first you have that difference. And another thing to look at here is the style of the panels. We have this large splash panel here, which even goes over the panel below it. And look at that border. Look at the border to these. They are all different shapes and sizes. A very dynamic design with the panels. And why is that? Well, that emphasizes the action, that emphasizes what's going on. It's both a different style, and it also follows the story that's being told. So let's review the vocabulary that we've learned in this video. A panel refers to each individual illustration, usually surrounded by a border. The gutter is the space between the panels. A splash panel is an illustration which takes up usually an entire page or most of an entire page. It often comes at the beginning of a sequence or a chapter or the beginning of a comic. A borderless panel is a panel which does not have a border.